It's such a pleasure to be here to have a chance to participate in the Evolutionary Festival, and very special thanks to everyone who made it possible. I have some sense of what it takes to pull an event like this off. Um, and I don't know that there could be a much more relevant topic. The imperative for change, for evolution, for another way of being, is as powerful as I could imagine it being. And evolution. I mean, the nature of evolution is that um, it goes on. It goes on, with us or without us. So then we've got this choice, really, whether we make the quantum leap that is being asked for us, or do we stumble? And if we're going to make that quantum leap, I think it's really important to feel the heartbreak of what is happening, the heartbreak of species that we will never see on this earth again, the heartbreak of habitats being destroyed, coral reefs, plastic in the oceans. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Um, and it's not a passive thing. It is our doing. I mean, it is our holocaust in a way. And what is at the source, the very nub of this holocaust, is our way of being. So then, if we're going to talk in terms of evolution, what we need to address is our way of being. And I think, my sense is that Earth is convulsing through labor pains, trying to birth in us a new way of understanding ourselves, a new way of coming back into relationship with the earth. One of the difficulties is that the way of being to which we are currently married has been with us. We've been evolving this way of being for 8,000 years. It's not a new thing. And to me, it's crucial to recognize the source of the values and the hierarchies and the ways of thinking that we've inherited. It's not that we've inherited them from the 20th century. We've inherited them from the Neolithic Revolution. The Neolithic Revolution was well underway in Europe by 6000 BC or 6000 BCE. And what did the Neolithic Revolution do? Prior to the Neolithic Revolution, which brought in agriculture and domesticated animals, and we built permanent settlements, prior to that was the Garden of Eden. And I say that because anthropologists, there was this survey done of anthropologists, and they were asked, if you could live at any time in the history of man, what era would you choose? And so many of them chose the Magdalenian, which is sort of late Paleolithic. Hunter-gatherer cultures at that point were so attuned to the world around them that I think they spent on average 11 to 15 hours a week looking after their basic needs. It is called the Original Leisure Society. And they felt the world around them with an intimacy that enabled them to walk into the woods and find what they needed to eat, to take care of their needs so simply. And, when we call it the Original Leisure Society, it's hard for us to really understand what that means, because leisure to us means you turn on the TV or you go to YouTube. And here's a culture where the downtime is filled with looking at stars and listening to birdsong and attuning to the world around them. That attunement is something I'd like to look closely at in a bit. But what happened with the Neolithic Revolution, everything changed. The world we are in now was begun. And you can see how that happens. If you imagine the first person taking the first seed and pushing the seed into the earth and patting it down, that single gesture has changed the entire arc of humanity. Suddenly, that piece of ground that the seed is buried in belongs to the person who planted the seed. There's now ownership. And the little green shoot growing up beside it is a weed. And until that moment, there was no such thing as a weed. And the animal coming along is vermin, because it might eat your plant. And until that moment, there was no such thing as vermin. And the tree growing beside your plant has to be cut down because it's putting your plant in shade. And everything changed with the Neolithic Revolution. The change was so dramatic that you can see it sort of echoed in three ways. In one, you look at how in the late Paleolithic, early Neolithic, cultures were gathered around the mother. The mother was the center of the family unit, of the social unit. And suddenly we grew from that into patriarchy. And the father is now the center of the family, the center of the social unit, the leader. So we shifted our allegiance in that way. We shifted our allegiance as well from the earth and its abundance and its music to the sky, to that ethereal blue above us. And suddenly we feel a tugging to transcend, to be more than human almost. And it's also the shift is also seen in our allegiance, where the goddess was manifest in every stalk of grass, in every ripple of the lake, in every bird song. And we turned from the goddess of the earth to the gods in the sky. And all of those values are the values that we have inherited, and they're values that have taken us headlong into a crisis, at the center of which is our neglect and demeaning of the female. And that, the source of that mistrust of the female lives in our bodies. Because at the same time that we turned from the earth to the sky and from the goddess to the gods, in ourselves, our center of awareness changed. We used to experience the center of our thinking in the belly. And that seems ridiculous to a culture that lives in their heads and is married to that fine faculty of the cranium. But that ancient way of understanding, of feeling the world, began to shift towards the head as we began to take more and more control over the world. So there are two poles of our consciousness. There is what I experience as the male pole, which is that pole that is capable of abstraction, that can know everything around it, that tends to pull things to pieces to understand them, but cannot feel the whole. And there's the pole in the pelvic bowl, which is where we can consciously be. That intelligence that comes into felt relationship with everything around it. And as we left that, which I experience in myself as the female pole of my consciousness, and we left that and turned up through the body towards the male pole of our consciousness to take control of the world around us. And so we demean within ourselves that rich, subtle, analog intelligence. I say analog intelligence because it feels the currents of the present. It hums to them. It resonates to them, which is so different from the intelligence in the cranium that sits at a distance from the world and almost digitizes it. That's a tree, that's a stone, that's a book, whatever it might be. So there was a trade-off we made through the Neolithic Revolution where we wanted the safety of being able to control things. And that became our whole agenda. And of course, when your agenda is to assert control and seek safety, then you mistrust spontaneity, you mistrust harmony, you mistrust life itself. You don't want harmony, you want order. And then the impulses of life begin to look like threats. Wildness is a threat to your control and your safety and your order. So our whole worldview as the Neolithic Revolution started to play out through the generations and through the millennia has been skewed to the point where we are living by a mistaken set of assumptions. And they're assumptions that are very, very difficult to question because they feel normal to us. The most difficult thing in the world is to question what you've habituated to. And so, if we are to evolve, we cannot afford to ignore or overlook the mistaken assumptions that live. It's not just that they live as ideas, they live in our bodies. Those mistaken assumptions are the anchor that is holding our current paradigm in place. So until we mine down and expose those assumptions, the paradigm will not be able to shift. So what I'd like to do is look at some of those mistaken assumptions because they're all barriers to our evolution. And it's not easy to look at them, but it's necessary to look at them. So let's begin with our senses. Let's begin with how we understand our senses. I mean, what could be more straightforward? We have 5 senses. It's self-evident until you go to other cultures that have a completely different sensorium. They organize, they feel, they experience their senses differently. So there's a culture, the Anglo-Ewe in Africa, and they don't even have a word for senses, but they do have a word that sort of covers what we mean by senses, and that word is sesilelame. Sesilelame means feel at flesh inside. Every sense is a matter of the whole body attuning, feeling inside. So, for example, they have a word in their vocabulary that means to listen with the ear, but that's not real listening. Real listening is when you feel the sounds of the world through your body. Real seeing is when you feel the colors and sights and movements of the world in your body. And, we don't have feel at flesh inside. What we have is think at head inside. That's our way of being. And there's a reason that we have these five senses and not, for example, balance. So balance in the Anglo-Ewe culture is almost the foremost sense. And you think, well, that's funny because, we talk about a sense of balance, and there's an organ devoted to the sense of balance. Why don't we include it as a sense? Well, we have constructed a self-image that has separated us from the world. Our safety in our attempts to create safety for ourselves, we experience the self with a boundary that separates it from the world. Now, all of our senses uphold that boundary. So, sight is light crosses the boundary and registers on the retina and goes to the brain and is interpreted. Sound, the same thing. Touch, taste. All of our senses follow the model of a stimulus from the outside crossing the boundary of the self, registering and being sent to the brain for interpretation. Balance doesn't conform to that. There's no boundary. You are being held by the earth, even as the earth is being held by you. You are in felt relationship with it. You can't establish a boundary, and so it corrodes our sense of safety. It diminishes the boundary on which we depend. So to understand that our senses are upholding our separation from the world is to see how our understanding and experience of the senses is a barrier to our evolution. So to think of the Sesalalame, to think of feeling the sights of the world within the spaciousness of your body, feeling the sounds of the world there, feeling the currents of the present there. It's a completely different experience, and it's one that is impossible if you contract into yourself out of the world and pretend that there's a boundary around you. So senses is one of those misunderstandings that we have normalized, we've habituated to, and we've got to see that that's a barrier to our evolution. We've got to open our eyes to this limitation. Another one is information. See, I think we are starved for information, which might seem like an odd statement in the midst of such an information glut, but there's only one kind of information we understand, which is digital information. We understand facts, and we want more of them, and we want all of them, and we will Google all day long getting answers to our questions. What fact am I missing? And that's, digital information. Yeah, it's one valid kind of information, but it is bits and pieces that are limited in their ability to convey the whole, to convey wholeness. The other kind of information is analog. So I come from an era when we used to play LPs, and you'd put the needle in the groove, and the grooves are going like this to the needle, and the needle is being shaped, and the music comes out. There's no digital interpretation. It's the orchestra moves the needle in the original wax um, album that is then duplicated, that moves the needle on your turntable, that comes out as sound. And there is a form of information that is not digital, that is so much richer than any facts you could accumulate. There's a story that I really love. Richard Nelson, who was an anthropologist, was in Alaska staying with an Inuit whale hunting party, and they were at this big opening in the ice, and they were all in a tent, and the opening, the whales, they'll come up through the opening to breathe, and there were no whales around, and they're sitting in the tent, and there's this old, really renowned whale hunter, Igruk, and he's off in a corner lying down on some furs. And he sits up at a point and he says, "A whale is very close, and I think it might surface soon." So everyone runs out of the tent to the open water, and sure enough, this gorgeous whaleback surfaces and blows. So there's Igruk on his furs in a tent, feeling the presence of the whale. That is analog information. And there are countless, countless stories. That is how we survived. We didn't survive by analyzing and planning and strategizing. We survived by feeling the world around us, by attuning to it. And the present is an infinite source of information. But because we have contracted into our heads, we've lost the very medium through which we attune to those resonances. There's nothing that happens beyond the body that isn't also happening in the body. It's just the nature of our reality. And that might sound hyperbolic, but there's a book I've got. Chance and Chaos by David Ruel. So in this book, he talks about this little experiment that I'll share with you. He says, okay, imagine that you have a magic wand, and by shaking this magic wand, you can make the gravitational field of a single electron at the remotest fringe of the universe disappear. The gravitational field of an electron. So you shake the wand, and impossibly far away, this gravitational field disappears. And then you've got a magic magnifying glass that can track molecules in the air. So you pick a molecule and you track it. And it goes through about 50 collisions that it would have gone through if you hadn't waved the magic wand, but then it misses a molecule that it would have hit. That takes about a second. After that second, all of the molecular collisions in the room are different from what they would have been. And if you were to go outside the next day and there's a bit of turbulence in the atmosphere, you would see cloud formations that are different. You would feel little gusts of wind that would be different because the gravitational field of a single electron at the outer fringe of the universe had disappeared. Everything affects everything. We are held within such a subtle weave of influences. And as we divorce from the body, we divorce from all that information. So we misunderstand information. We misunderstand dimensions. I mean, we've got 4 dimensions. We've got 3 dimensions of space, length, width, and height, and we've got 1 dimension of time. What these dimensions do is they measure the separation, the distance between things. I'm, 2 feet from that book. I saw her 2 hours ago. Dimensions measure distance. They divide the world in the same way that we divide ourselves inside the body. There's a dimension that is missing, and that is the dimension in which everything is understood to be in contact with everything else at all times. That dimension doesn't exist for us. I mean, we have words like field, we have words like mind or consciousness, but it's not a fantasy. Physics has established that quantum entanglement is a fact, that two particles light years away can affect each other instantaneously. They are in contact. Yes, they're 100 million miles apart, but they are in contact. So there is this other dimension in which everything is in contact with everything else, and that's the dimension that the body attunes to. And it's in that dimension that we have a chance of evolving. Because if we can harmonize with the world will carry us forward. That separation, that inclination to divide the world and separate, leads to another misunderstanding, which is that we see things around us. We even feel the self as a thing. And the reality is there is no such thing as a thing. What I mean by that, we have a mental construct that can be fairly static, but nothing around us is static. There is no thing. There are only processes. That's what we live in. We live in a world of processes, and this glass of water is a process, and the tree outside my window is a process. And if you think of the tree as a thing, you miss the whole story. You miss the whole reality. If I were to understand the tree as a process, then I were to say, where does that process end? Where's the boundary of the tree? Well, you might say, the roots of the tree are certainly part of the process of the tree, but then so are the minerals in the soil around it, and the moisture in the soil around. They're part of the process of the tree, and even the bugs and the tiny bacteria. They're all part of the process of a tree, and of course the water that falls on the earth is part of the process of that tree. And so the clouds are part of the process of that tree. And the mountains that push the rain out of the clouds are part of the process of that tree, as is the ocean beyond the mountains that gives its water up to create those clouds, as is the sun that evaporates that water. Where does the tree end? It doesn't. The tree implicates the whole of the universe once you understand it as a process. But the same is true of the self. Where does the process that I call me end? Where's my boundary? And even as I say, where's my boundary? I'm letting air into the world that is actually part of me becoming the world. And then I take a breath into my body and the world becomes me. And I feel the air around my body that has a certain temperature and is part of the process of my body. And the gravity of the earth holding me to it is part of the process of my body. My body, like the tree, implicates the universe. My process is indistinguishable from the process of the universe. Another barrier to our evolution, apart from our misunderstanding of the senses, our misunderstanding of information, our misunderstanding of the dimensions and things rather than processes, lies in our values that say up is good and down is bad. If I say, you're looking up today, I mean, there's no ambiguity about what that means, right? That's a good thing. Now, in another culture, if I were to say you're looking up today, it might mean you're looking a little ungrounded and flighty. Are you okay? But no, in our culture, to be up is good. And if I'm saying you're looking a little low, you're looking down, we know that's bad. And again, in another culture, if I said to someone, you're looking a little down today, it might mean you're looking at peace with yourself and at rest on the earth. How wonderful. So we have to understand that there is a tug within us to transcend. It has to do with our relationship to the body. We've left the pelvic bowl. We've left the belly. We've migrated up through the body into the head, and the higher the better. And my gosh, to be telling a culture that lives in its head, raise your consciousness. I don't know that there could be a more damaging instruction. Lower your consciousness. Come back to the earth. Come back to the earth that cries out for your help. Feel yourself at rest on it and offer to it your willingness to hear what it needs. As long as we are tugged by that value to climb the corporate ladder, to be on top, all of these metaphors that tell us that up is good and down is bad prevent us from being at rest on the earth. And if you're not at rest on the earth, how can you be at rest in the present? And if you're not at rest in the present, how can it whisper to you that a whale is about to breach? You are losing the most vital information that we need in order to move ourselves forward. Another misunderstanding. Sorry, I'm just going through misunderstanding. It feels necessary to unpack the barriers. Until we unpack the barriers, how are we going to move forward? So we misunderstand questions. We think a question is something that needs an answer. We think the important part of that equation is the answer. And we've been drilled with that. They get us as kids for 12 years in the education system. And if you have the right answer, you're rewarded. And if you don't, you're punished. It's all about the answers. And the education system does almost nothing to cultivate the ability to ask a question. But it's the question that will move you forward. Google has all the answers, but if you ask Google, what question should I be asking? Nada, right? It doesn't have it. Questions aren't necessarily something to be resolved, something to be answered. The most important questions are to be felt, and they are to be felt for the whole of your life. You're not going to get an answer. But if you don't feel that question, then your life is without a quest. It's the question that moves us forward. It's the question that gets us going. And love the question and feel it as deeply as you can. That's where the value of the body's intelligence lies, because it's the body that feels the question. It's the body that responds and orients. It's like the question activates an inner compass, and wham, that compass points you in a certain direction, and then you're off. You're riding your purpose as the sailboat rides its keel. Speaking of the education system, we misunderstand what intelligence is. We've defined intelligence according to the the brilliant, wonderful intelligence in the head. We've put it in charge of telling us what intelligence is. And what it's come up with is intelligence is the ability to reason in an abstract fashion, which just happens to be the specialty of that intelligence in the head. And that's a form of intelligence. I don't want to take anything away from it, but for me, it's like this one wavelength on this vast spectrum. And if I were to find a word to name that spectrum, I would first say sensitivity. And I don't care what sensitivity. It can be a sensitivity to a worm wriggling in your hand. It can be a sensitivity to a child's tears, to the stars at night, to birdsong, to Mozart, to Shakespeare. Any sensitivity is a form of intelligence. Any sensitivity. Now, the problem with a sensitivity, not the problem, the gap in the sensitivity is that it's reactive. It has to be. I mean, if the retina didn't react to light, we wouldn't see. It has to be reactive. So that reactivity has to be grounded in order for the information to become coherent. And that's where the body comes in. That's where our sense of rest comes in. So for me, intelligence is the quality of grounded sensitivity. And if you can feel that for yourself just for a moment, to feel yourself grounded in this place at this moment, and sensitize yourself to it, you'll feel the whole of your being thinking. We imagine that thinking just happens in the head. That's another misunderstanding. We've identified the mind with the brain. We speak of mind and brain as if they're synonymous. Mind suffuses the whole of your body. There's not a cell in your body that doesn't participate in its thinking. Every single cell. And the brain is a part of that, but every one of us has been wounded in a very fundamental way by our culture. And that wound has separated our thinking from our being. We have come to believe that we can think more clearly with this fragmented portion of our intelligence in the head than we can with the whole of our being. In fact, we have difficulty remembering what it is to think with the whole of your being. That's what Igruk was doing, lying on his furs in that tent. He was thinking with the whole of his being. Until we can think with the whole of our being, how can we harmonize with the wholeness of the world? We are divided ourselves. If you're divided, how do you join wholeness? So that intelligence in the head, once it's like reversing what happened during the Neolithic Revolution, where our center of awareness rose up through the body into the head. Well, that center of awareness can travel back down. It can drop down through the body right down to the pelvic floor. And when it does, thinking and being become the same thing. So you experience every thought through the body. It's like every thought resonates through your being and clarifies as it does. And every sensation in the body is understood as a form of thinking. And then it's like the old Latin word sentire that gave us our word sense. And sentire meant to think, to feel. It was the same thing. And that's still evident in English, because I might say, I sense you're mistaken, and that's an analytical thing. Or I might say, I sense there's danger nearby, and that's a felt thing. So we still have the trace of their identity within our language, but we've lost the experience of that identity. So all of these misunderstandings are part of they anchor the paradigm that is causing us such distress. They, the effect of them is to dull us to the reality of the world. And as that happens, we contract in such a way that we feel alone. And we feel our aloneness as a real thing. Now, I mean, there is no aloneness. The world feels your presence with more intimacy than you could feel yourself. Your every heartbeat is felt by the room around you. Your every breath, your every thought. It's all felt. It's all part of the field. There's no such thing as aloneness. There is only companionship. But once you buy into that idea that I am alone, once you accept that, and the whole of our culture is telling you you're alone, it's like a domino effect. As soon as you feel you're alone, then you understand that your experience is strictly private. Once you understand that, then the foremost job in your life is to make that experience a success. You want it to feel good. You want it to feel right. And so what you do is you take the spotlight of your attention and you turn it off the world and put it onto yourself so you can supervise your experience. And you are now in a divided state. There is the supervisor and the supervised. And you've left the world in darkness, and you have bound yourself in self-consciousness. You're now conscious of the self. In fact, your primary relationship, the whole of the universe to come into relationship with, and your primary relationship for the rest of your life is now between the divided parts of yourselves. That's the relationship that occupies your attention more than any other relationship. So aloneness is another barrier, and the barrier is the barrier that separates us from the world. I mean, that's the ultimate barrier. We misunderstand the body. Maybe that's the last misunderstanding I dwell on. We experience the body as a thing rather than a process dependent on the whole of the universe and expressive of the whole of the universe. And the body fundamentally is a resonator. The body, the body is like a singing bell. And it resonates to the present. And that's where it comes most alive. But what happens in our culture is we we stuff the body full of anxieties and trauma and emotional hurts that we cannot integrate, and we stuff it full of ideas that aren't integrated. And like an unintegrated, there's a joke that's quite horrible that I like. Um, a comedian said, you know, stereotypes are a real time saver. And I think, yeah, ouch. Because of course I don't have to take the time to get to know that person. I know just who they are by looking at them. I've got them pegged, right? But those are unintegrated ideas that consolidate the body, and we divide the body up. We don't know how to connect our brains and our hearts. It's like well, you can have one or you can have the other, but they don't go together. How does the analytical mind join with the heart? How does the heart join with the belly? How do the legs, the intelligence of the legs, join with the intelligence of the heart? We've divided the body, and so it's stuffed. And so here's where we're at in our aloneness. The present is going like this the whole time. The whale is about to breach, and we don't even know it's out there. We don't even feel the present. Now, when you don't feel the present, you've only got one choice, which is to supervise yourself, because you're missing the guidance of the world. Your compass has nothing to orient to. And so you are consolidating the need to make your own decisions independently and analytically and impose those on the body, and you become more and more deeply mired in your self-division. And so inner work is crucial. But inner work is, the nature of inner work is to find what is compromising the spaciousness of your being, to find the barriers, the blocks within you, and to gently undo them. And as you do, you are opening the body. And once again, it can ring to the present, and you'll feel the world. And so that's, we talk about embodiment in terms of listening to the body. And there's value in listening to the body, because that's how you encounter the consolidations, the divisions. But that's not embodiment. Listening to the body is a state of self-consciousness. What the body most deeply understands is that it belongs to the world. You stand before a tree and you feel its presence, and you belong to each other. The body knows that. A dragonfly lands on your arm, and you feel its presence, and you are together with it. The body feels how it belongs to the whole of the world. And if you're listening to the body, you are shutting down that channel. Embodiment is a state in which the whole of your intelligence comes into coherence with the present. And so embodiment isn't about listening to the body. Embodiment is about listening to the world through the body. And that's what we've lost. But that is the beginning of our evolutionary process. What I mean by that is the door that opens to possibility, to a different way of being. We're not going to figure that out in our heads. We can't figure out in our heads what our new way of being would be, because the thinking of our heads is patterned. It's digital. We need analog thinking to activate us and move us forward. It's, the thrust of our evolutionary arc to date has been the desire for safety and control, and those live within our being. So I'd like to look at those just for a bit. I've real questions about safety. Like, I've noticed for myself that if you're alive, you're not safe. If you're alive, you're going to stub your toe. You're going to get hurt. You're going to get sick. You're going to die. It's not safe to be alive. And I think our culture sort of internalizes that and understands that in a way and comes up with the conclusion, well, then maybe if I'm less alive, I'll be more safe. And so we diminish our living. We make ourselves small. We contract within ourselves in this quest for safety. So if you're looking for safety, you are dulling yourself to life. Life is risky. It's wild. The only way you can create safety is by putting up barriers. And those barriers are the walls of the prison within which you confine yourself. And there is an alternative to safety, which is security. And there is only one primary security that you have, which is the security of your being. When you drop down into your being and you are here and you feel your presence, there is no need for safety anymore. You just are, and you feel that, and that is enough. And the barriers we erect in this ancestral quest for safety dull us, that quality of the present. At every single moment, the present is whispering to you to activate your gifts, to put them into service. No one else has ever been born with the unique cluster of gifts that you have. And the world is whispering to you to activate them, to put them into service. And from a place of security, you can do that. From a fortress of safety, you can't. And that fortress, the barriers live in our bodies. So I'd like to take a moment to look at that. I should also say, if anyone has any questions, one of my favorite things to do is to listen to questions and feel my way through them and respond. So feel free to type a question into the chat if you have one, or just say, I've got a question, and I'll get to it. Let's look at some of the ways in which the body holds barriers to the world. The jaw in our culture is a barrier. We stiffen it, we harden it. If you can take your finger and shake your jaw, you may find that it doesn't want to be shaken because it's holding on. And that holding on is a tension that is establishing who you know yourself to be. We hold tension in our musculature to establish who we know ourselves to be. And you've got a choice. You can be who you know yourself to be, or you can be present. You can't have it both ways. The present is an unknown. To join the present, you have to let go of who you know yourself to be and allow the world to illuminate that for you. This is another essential misunderstanding. We think that who we are, our inner truth, is somewhere down deep inside of us, and we can find ourselves by going there. And I just, that doesn't make any sense to me at all. I discover who I am by coming into relationship with the world around me. You know, I stand before a mountain and I feel its presence, and who I am is illuminated by that mountain. Or I stand in a river and I feel its current and come into relationship with it, and who I am is illuminated by that river, or by that tree, or by that little child playing on the sidewalk. It's as I come into felt relationship with the world around me that who I am is illuminated. I'm not in charge of that. I open to the possibility and discover myself through the world around me. So these tensions in the body, it's like the root of the tongue holds tension. The back, my God, the back. We've lost the back in our culture. What I mean by that, I teach workshops all around the world, and the back is so available to the breath. The back, the greatest support for your breath is in the back, but it's locked up. We've lost it. And there's that, I mean, it's part of our cultural denial of the female. There are these axes in the body that, for me, run along male-female lines. So I've talked about the male cranial intelligence and the female intelligence of the pelvic bowl. And we know about right-left, where the right hand, the left brain, tends to be dominant and male, and the left hand is more attuned and relational. The same is true of the front and the back. We're all about the front, you know, show up, put on your best face, whatever it is, and we lose the back. And there is half the world at your back. And there are ancestors supporting you at your back. And there is a world of mystery at your back. And by shutting down the back to the breath, you dull yourselves to that support. And so, you know, it's just it's these culturally embedded barriers. We have learned to shut down the body from our culture. We've learned to hold tension in the belly, so the breath will naturally go down to the pelvic floor. The pelvic floor is a diaphragm. I mean, there's the thoracic diaphragm and there's the pelvic floor, and they move like this, except that in our culture, this gets locked up. And so the thoracic diaphragm is actually working against the organs. When they work together, it's like this internal massage through all the viscera. But we clench the belly. Every time there is tension held in the body, it is a form of resistance to the present. Every single time. The legs, I mean, in our culture, the legs are prosthetics. We've dissociated from their intelligence. They perambulate us around, but no, the legs are these conduits to the earth. They attune to so much presence, and there is such a deep, abiding calm in the legs as they become grounded. They ground the body. I mean, there you go. It's in our language. The neck. You may think your neck is loose. Let somebody else take your head and see if they can move it easily. No, you need to control it, because it's like the head is mission central, and you want to be in charge of mission central. That's just a light overview of the barriers that live in our bodies that will impede our ability to move forward in harmony with the earth on which we live. There's a question: what moved humanity to move towards a safer way of living? Is it an intrinsic desire to control, or something else? It's a cultural choice. There are cultures. I'm thinking of the Pitaha in the Amazon forest. Amazing tribe, amazing. There's a guy, Dan Everett, who's lived with them. It's like you can't even learn their language. They have an allegiance to the present that is embedded in their language, in their customs. They have such an allegiance to the present that there are only three ways of constructing a verb. It can mean, I saw this myself, I personally experienced this, or I talked to someone who personally experienced this, or I saw evidence that leads me to believe that this happened. So there is no, I heard from Joe that his aunt said that. No. That's make-believe. Did you see it? Did you talk to the person who saw it? Then don't bother with make-believe. So their whole language is attuned to here and now. They have a word when someone goes ahead on the path and then goes out of sight. It's like they've gone out of my experience. You don't make assumptions that they've gone around the corner and down the hill, because you didn't see that. So there are cultures, and the Pitaha for 250 years, like they've had contact with civilizations, so-called civilization, for 250 years, and they just have no interest. They have no interest in growing food. Why would they? Dan said, a Pitaha could walk naked into the Amazonian jungle, and 2 days later come out with a knife that he's fashioned in a basket of food. They just are so exquisitely attuned to the world around them. They don't need to control. They don't seek that. There's no inclination, it seems, within that culture to give up harmony in favor of control. And harmony and control, again, it's another misunderstanding we have. We think of them as the same thing. They're opposites. Harmony is what happens when every part of an organic whole yields without resistance to every other part. I think there's a murmuration of starlings. This is my book, Radical Wholeness, and on the cover is a murmuration of starlings. There, if you don't know what a murmuration of starlings is, go to YouTube and Google it. It's the most exquisite harmony I know of, where up to 250,000 birds at dusk gather and move like an amoeba in the sky, and they lift and they condense and they ripple and they descend, and no one's in charge. Every bird is attuned to every other bird, and they're just responding as an organic whole. And your body can be like that. You can gather all the starlings in your body, all the lost birds, and bring them into harmony and feel them in congruence, feel them pulse together. So that's a long-winded answer to your question. We've lost sensitivity as we've turned away from the female, and it's sensitivity that allows us to attune to the world. Without sensitivity, all we have is control. And so then the question is how to regain sensitivity. How do we live in this current world as a highly sensitive being? So often I feel my limitations to feel the pain. Am I supposed to be okay with it at some point? Until you reclaim the groundedness of your body, you can't just open to the pain. So it's like a seesaw effect. So you gain a little bit more of your body and the security of that, and then you can surrender to the pain, to the world, to the present a little bit more. And then you can surrender a little bit more to the body and surrender a little bit more to your own freedom. And bit by bit, you come home to yourself. I wish there were a quick fix, but I've yet to find one. I'd just like to talk a little bit. When you're married to safety in the way that our culture is, when you've contracted from the world to within those barriers, the wildness is dangerous. It just is. You don't trust it. It's a threat. Now, if you're not able to embrace wildness, I don't think you can be fully present. And I say that because the present, the nature of the present is that of a wild peace. The present is wild. There's no taming it. There's no predicting it. There's no stopping it. The present is wild, and the present is utterly at peace. And it's this dance between the tension of peace and wildness that moves the world, but it's that same creative tension that moves your life. So how to find your wild peace? And you find both, right? You find your peace, your groundedness, and you find your spontaneity and the impulses that move you and the freedom to let that happen. And they're both necessary. But when you find your wild peace, it's so much easier to be with the wild peace of the present. And all of nature models that for us. I mean, nature is wild. Nature is completely at peace. You stand in a forest and you feel the peace of it and you feel the wildness of it. And neither takes away from the other. They support each other, the wildness and the peace. And nature teaches us through what it loves. So I'm aware of 3 things that nature loves. Nature loves change. It's not gonna arrive at a destination. No, it's evolving, it's moving. It's like uh, every time I go outside, it's a new day, it's a different world. It's like at this, especially right now, I'm in springtime where I am, and everything's changing. But that's always the case, even in the dead of winter. Nature loves change. Nature loves diversity. Nature isn't interested in making the same thing twice. Nature doesn't say, oh, I've perfected it. Now I just have to go on making the same thing. No, no. Nature is abundant and it's at play. It's a profusion of diversity. The more diversity, the better. And nature loves service. There's nothing that is born that is not born into service. The earthworm burrowing in the dank earth, the wolf prowling through the forest, the hawk sailing on the breeze. They are all in service. I watch the birds around here. They groom the trees. They groom the grass. You know, the bird takes off and flies over there. Why? It is harmonizing with the world. It is in service. And you look at what nature loves, and then you look at our head-based culture, and we resent change because we have our plans, and a lot depends on them, and we don't want them to be messed with. And we fear diversity because we want the world to be homogenized. We want control. We want things the same. And you get something different, and that's a threat. And we fear diversity. And service? We serve only ourselves and find that to be natural. We serve only ourselves. And the world, the heartbreak of the world, is crying out for you to be activated, to be wild, to risk whatever it takes to engage and make a difference. I did in my description say I would offer a practice. Would you guys be up for a practice? All right. So I've talked about the barriers to our evolution and how they live in the body. And this practice countervails against that, against some of that, certainly against the body as a thing, against our value of up versus down, against our need to be in control. It's a different sort of practice. So you can stand for it if you'd like. I'd suggest that might be helpful, and you can sit if you'd like. That's absolutely fine too. And just take a moment wherever you are to feel the body release to the in-breath and release to the out-breath. And see if you can release the body to the breath without supervising. What happens if you let the body do what it knows so deeply how to do, what it's known how to do since the day you were born as a baby? What does it feel like to just release the body to the in-breath and release the body to the out-breath? And then, as gently as you can, bring your awareness to the energies in your body and just begin to gently, gently notice them. So, for instance, there may be a little fuzzball of anxiety somewhere in the body. And I'd invite you to bring your awareness to it without judgment, without needing it to be in any way different from what it is. What happens if you just allow yourself to feel its presence and honor it by feeling it? Just feel it there. And there may be a little jitteriness in your body, the tugging of expectation, what next, how next, when next. And just gently feel any of that jittery energy in your body. And again, honor it by feeling it. And feel it without expectation, without asking it in any way to be different from what it is. Give it your unconditional acceptance. And bring your awareness to the energy of the legs and just feel how that energy lives there through those conduits to the earth. And feel its charge and feel its strength and feel its movement. And bring your awareness to the energy of your thoughts. So not to the thoughts themselves, but to the energy behind the thoughts, the energy that drives those thoughts. It's a little like peeking behind the curtain to discover the Wizard of Oz. And just feel that energy. Locate it as specifically as you can. And feel it there. And then gently bring your awareness to anywhere in the body that the energy is a little held, a little caught, a little stuck. Just find every little place in the body where those little bits of energy are stuck or held. And then bring the awareness to the whole of your body and feel it as a field of energy. And it might almost feel like opening your eyes on a star field at night. And just feel the energy shimmering and moving within. And welcome it all. And then gently, gently give that energy permission to begin to melt. And you feel it melting inside your body. And as it melts, it begins to trickle down through the body like water through pebbles. It's like this descending cascade down through the body. And you feel it descending and it drops down, trickling down through the torso, down through the legs. You feel it dropping and you feel the first little trickle arrive on the soles of your feet. And still the energy is melting and trickling down and descending, and those pools grow inside your feet, up through your ankles in response. They begin to rise up inside the legs like a tide, and still you're noticing any little stuck bits of energy and giving them the love of your unconditional acceptance. And you feel them soften and melt under the influence of that love. And as they do, they trickle down, wash down in a cascade through the body. And that fluid energy rises up through the legs, eventually to the pelvic floor. And still the energy is being noticed and loved and melted and allowed to descend. And that fluid energy rises eventually to the top of the pelvic bowl. And feel the last few trickles descending through your torso. And notice how much spaciousness there is within your body. The spaciousness of the singing bowl. And feel that fluid energy in the pelvic bowl and the legs. And discover for yourself how to give it permission to come completely to rest. What is the risk for you in allowing that energy to rest on the earth? And you give it permission to rest and you feel the weight of it on the soles of your feet resting. And it rests more deeply and you feel it join the earth. and it rests more deeply still, and you feel it join the present. And notice that delicious marriage within your body of that available wide open spaciousness above and that deeply grounded energy below. And feel how each supports the other. And you might reflect back on our reframing of the word intelligence as a grounded sensitivity. And there within your body is the groundedness of that fluid intelligence of the legs that rest on the earth, and that spacious, wide open, sensitized availability of the body above. And just for a moment, allow yourself to attune. Just that. There is no conclusion. There is no language. There is no description or comment. What does it mean in this moment to rest within the present and simply attune to it? And that brings this practice to a close. And it brings our time together to a close. So a heartfelt thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you to James and Alla and Melanie for all your support. I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival, and my love goes with you. Thank you so much.